Regrettably, I'm about to cause trouble. Written and narrated by Amie McNee. Chapter 33. I need to get back in, I said to Rufus. I will be able to get back in, he whispered, but you won't be allowed entry. No, it needs to be me, I whispered. He bit his lip. I can get back in and ask if the king will see you. I couldn't think of a better idea. Very well. If I promise John I'll play a game of dice with him, he will let you both stay on his boat. Why does John like you so much? We got to our feet, though nearly all of Zita's weight was upon me. Because I have notorious bad luck when it comes to dice. He didn't elaborate. We walked back down to the boat. We're going to get her. We're going to get her, I repeated, arm around Zita's shoulder as I helped her aboard. We sat in the corner of the small cabin and we waited. For how long? I couldn't be sure. We both slept a bit. John's crude voice was in my dreams, but I didn't wake until he shoved me. You'll want to see this. Is Rufus back? What's this name you keep calling him? Is Reasonable back? I snapped. No, he ain't, but something is happening. All my tummy did was flip and turn these days. I rested the still sleeping Zita on the seat and followed John out. It was fully morning now, and a fleet of small boats was arriving at the gate. Who are they? I asked. Couldn't tell you yet. Witch burners. People employed by the king to burn witches, witch hunters from the continent. Witch sniffers. People who had a nose for magic and could smell it out. They're Spanish, he said, noticing the flags. They were. They were so close now I could hear them chattering in their lyrical language. The boatsmen helped them dock, and then they started alighting. Everyone was in black. Oh. She's dead, I said. Who? John replied. Catherine of Aragon. It was her household, or what was left of them. And that man, I pointed at a sharply dressed man with jet black hair. That's the ambassador, I whispered. And that. It was her. Surely it was her. There were no other black people in the company. And that? Asked John, taking a puff of his pipe. I think that's Reasonable's mother. Well, I'll be damned. I have changed plans, I said to John quickly. Rufus will play 2 whole games of dice with you if you take care of Zita, perhaps feed her a bit when she wakes. 2 games? Yes. What if she makes a racket again? Tell her that Maude and Rufus are fixing everything. If she makes a racket, he has to play 3 games. Deal. I shook his worn hands and moved towards the group of disembarked Spaniards. The woman was standing near the back. She was just a servant, after all. Guards were approaching, and words were being exchanged. The men at the bank of the river were helping tie the boats up, and there was enough hubbub for me to get close without too much attention on me. I pulled my hood over my head and sidled up beside her. Excuse me, good woman. She was bending over, picking up a trunk. Aye, she said, wary. Is your son named Reasonable? Nothing betrayed her. She looked blankly at me. It's not his born name, she said finally, but some call him that. I am his... I searched. Friend. There is trouble for me and him in court. What sort? What sort of friend? I asked, heart-thumping. An idiot. What sort of trouble? Oh. It is a long story. I need to enter the court with you. Is my boy well? Yes, he is well. He is at court? He is. How can I trust you? What if you are a vagabond or a thief? Your Spanish name is Catalina. She raised her chin at me, still unsure. And Rufus hates to sweep the floors, I tried. I mistakenly made him sweep on several occasions to his deep displeasure. She looked at me with new eyes. Are you my daughter-in-law? No, I'm not his wife. She was suspicious about that. I will get to see him. I will make sure of it. Then stand by me as we enter. Keep your head down. I did so. You are here without Lady Catherine, I confirmed. She has passed. I'm so sorry for your loss, I whispered. She was my captor. She took me away from my home. We began to move closer to the gates. I looked at Catalina. Her words were cold, but her eyes mourned. Sad, sad eyes. But then again, perhaps she always looked like this. Perhaps this grief was for her homeland, for Rufus. It was no problem gaining entry. The ambassador had brought so many people with him that I just slipped in with the group. None of the Spanish even noticed me. The problem would be getting through to where the king was. I was not sure how far the Spanish servants would be allowed to go. Base court was fine. Then we were passed to the clock tower court. Easy. Now for the king's gallery. I got myself ready to peel off if we were not allowed entry, but the ambassador took every single one of us to the king's gallery. He even directed me and Catalina to stand in front of him. He looked me straight in the eye and told me to stand before him in Spanish. I was astounded, but I did as I was told and became part of the human chainmail around his precious personage. We entered the gallery. We were made to wait. There was shuffling and whispering in Spanish. Catalina stayed quiet. I followed her lead. I heard a rustling from the passages that led to His Majesty's rooms. I had only known the king a handful of days, but I already knew how to read his heavy footfall. He was angry, confused, irritated. I could hear it in the way his shoes landed on the stone. I looked around, realizing what was about to happen. I was at the front of a pack of Spaniards. I, the witch who had helped birth the King of England's cursed baby. I was meant to be imprisoned in my own rooms, accused of devil work. I was definitely not meant to be at the front of a group of Spaniards who were about to announce the death of the King of England's first wife. The door banged open, and the king, followed by his closest counsel, flew out into the room. I dropped to the floor in a deep curtsy, and my dramatic gesture frightened most of the other servants into doing the same. "What in God's name are you doing here?" he bellowed. "What does she want?" It seemed strange to me he couldn't gather what had happened. I suppose he had got little to no sleep last night, his mind preoccupied with the loss of his child. But this was Lady Catherine's court, all in black. I wondered if he would cry upon hearing the news. I retreated further back into my hood. "Your Majesty," said the ambassador, standing among his company. "Bad tidings. I heard him swallow. Your sister-in-law, the Lady Dowager Catherine of Aragon, has been taken by God." There was a silence, interrupted by the noise of the ambassador swallowing. "Thank you, ambassador, for giving me this news." The king took a large breath. I wanted to look at his face. His deep inhalation was released suddenly in an erratic, alarming laugh. "God be praised! We are free from all suspicion of war," he said loudly, obviously addressing his council. He continued to chuckle, and there were other sighs of relief from the English. "I'm sorry for your loss, ambassador," the king continued, still sounding jolly. "We will, of course, conduct proceedings to mourn the Princess Dowager." I heard him move away, and there was much chattering between the English. There was mention of the French, the war, the Pope, all the words infused with excited energy. I was dumbfounded. I looked to my right at Catalina. I caught the moment a tear hit the floor. She was weeping. "Get the Spanish rooms," he demanded to the guards. "Your Majesty," said a bodiless voice, "there is no space at court. Yuletide fills us to the brim." "Ask people to leave, then." "Aye, Your Majesty, and get them food and wine." "Of course, Your Majesty." "Go take your company to the Great Hall," he instructed the ambassador. We made to move, but the king stopped us. "Wait. What of a will?" "She's left everything to her servants and to your daughter, Your Majesty." There was a tight pause. "Quite right." Another pause. "Anything for me?" he added, like a child. This man was astonishing. "A letter, Your Majesty." The ambassador leant over me, handing the king the parchment. "We're going to keep this from me," he snapped, snatching it. "No, Your Majesty." "Go to the hall." We all rose, and I turned inwards, planning to follow them. But this was my chance. Two forces were battling out within my insides. My body was moving away from the king, but my mind was trying to convince my legs to stop. Stay. This is your chance. "Catalina." I reached for her hand. "The rooms closest to the inner gates in the base court. I will meet you there before evening." She didn't say anything in reply. I managed to still myself. The rest of the dowager's small court moved past me. "Your Majesty?" The king was hugging the Duke of Norfolk, delighted, smiling bigger than I had seen him in a long time. He turned to me. I dropped my hood. His eyes widened. "Guards," he barked. "Your Majesty, I beg of you, I need a moment with you. I have much to say that you will want to hear." "How did you get out of your rooms? Why were you with the Spanish?" He tilted his head in amazement. "Good God, you are of another realm." I bowed low again. "Your Majesty, you need to hear what I have to tell you." You think anything you have to say is of more importance than the death of my sister-in-law? I'm grieving, he said loudly, half laughing again. I wondered if he might actually be very sad. Your Majesty, I have seen things. Norfolk spoke. You do not need the wild ramblings of a witch girl, Henry. You need my words too, Norfolk, I said quickly. He slapped me across the face. I had heard about this man's reputation, but I hadn't been expecting a slap. I looked up at the king, my face stinging. Norfolk had been sporting a large and sharp ring. Why backhand me? Why not use the palm? My eyes watered, but I did not take my hand to my face. Your Majesty, this is a day of good news. I have more to give you, I tried. He liked me. He had from the start. Something about my insolence, perhaps. Send her to my chambers, he said to a guard. I will meet you there in time. Do not leave her unaccompanied. I exhaled slowly. Someone grabbed me by the arm, and I was taken to the king's chambers, for the second time in a week. I stood in the audience chamber, staring at the guard who was assigned to keep watch. He feared me, giving me furtive looks. Other people were there too, with gifts for the king. Yuletide presents that had turned to get-well presents after the king's accident, that had then miraculously transformed into mourning presents. The chamber was abuzz with the news from the most eventful court Christmas in their time. Thankfully, word of Anne's miscarriage was not on anyone's lips. I tried to focus on Hildy, sitting in her eternal silence, in the dark. I hoped I was not too late. I moved my weight from one foot to the other, trying to stay focused, stay awake. This was for Hildy. For the child who lost her mother, who loved my aunt, who was so gentle and so kind and loved me like a daughter, or a sister. Hildy, who respected me and my powers. The door banged open, and I jumped. It was Norfolk. The king is not receiving any visitors until after today's feast. There was a grumbling of impatient flatterers. I tried to make eye contact with the Duke. Did that mean me? He caught my eye and sauntered over. He had a droopy face, like it was melting. You think you're an exception, don't you, witch? I have the greatest gift to give the king, better than all these saddles and shirts, one he should not wait for. Norfolk sat down on the king's throne, bold, but he had not yet excused me. The room emptied, but I did not move. He watched me, thinking. You want to make a bargain for the return of your coven mate? Yes. A witch for a witch, I said, my mouth dry. His eyebrow rose. The door opened, and my mother, Jane the Fool, her guardian, and the Queen walked in. She was alive. She was still pale, and my mother held her up, but she was alive. I fought the impulse to tell her to lie down. Why tell her to lie down when your intention is to see her burn? At the thought, I searched for my mother's gaze. I wanted to be young again, a child, without any responsibility. She wouldn't look at me. Norfolk, the Queen said, voice stronger than she looked. You! She was pointing her finger at him. The king and his company entered. He was wearing an entirely yellow outfit with a big white feather in his cap. He was the picture of joy. He stopped at the strange spectacle, and Norfolk slunk out of the king's chair. Anne continued. What happened last night happened because of you, uncle. The way you told me about my husband's fall. It shocked me into labour. You intended to shock me. Norfolk rolled his eyes. The king held up his hand, calling for silence. You haven't heard, he said to his wife, walking over to his throne. Heard what? She whispered, as though all her energy was suddenly gone. The Princess Dowager is dead. He sat and crossed his legs contentedly. Anne's mouth parted. She let out the same relieved laugh as the king had a moment before. Then I am the one true queen. It was only then I realized that the old queen's death could be detrimental to my cause. This could reignite everything. I looked to Henry. You were always the one true queen, he said, his expression unreadable. Your Majesty, you should rest, I said to the Queen, intentionally resurrecting the memory of the night. The king turned his head to me. You are the strangest, boldest little thing I have ever come across. He wasn't upset. Queen Anne, I said, ignoring him, you shouldn't be standing up. Anne's once bright eyes looked into me, like I looked into her. Then she nodded. I will want a yellow dress, and I want wine and food brought to me, to my bed. I intend to celebrate the death of the false queen, she said clearly. Finally, I am safe. She said those words directly to me. Then she turned and left. Henry sighed heavily, fingering the white feather in his hat. She spoils my good mood, he said absent-mindedly. I swayed on the spot, my exhaustion getting the better of me. Let's deal with you before you keel over, or worse, annoy me, said the king. Your lover begged me to see you on my way to these chambers. I told him you were, in fact, awaiting me here. That would have been confusing for him. He was puzzled, he confirmed, giving a small smile. He swiveled on his chair so that his legs draped over the armrest. A servant offered him wine, and he took it. He took a deep sip. It has been a strange few days. The strangest, I agreed. You speak out of turn, said Norfolk. I wish to speak to the king alone, I clarified. Do you know what company you are in? Said Norfolk. I am very aware of it, my lord, I said. Henry liked it when I was audacious. You will all leave me. I will give the witch a moment. Everyone present made noises of disapproval, but Henry didn't respond, and slowly the lords left the room. All the servants stayed. It's funny how at the end of the day, the servants are privy to all. The air stilled. Sit, he gestured to the floor by his feet. Fine. I put myself onto the floor and looked up to him. To remind you of your place, which you frequently forget. Verily, I do need reminding, Your Majesty. He wanted me to play, but I did not want to play. This was the very worst thing I have ever done in my life. What do you have to say to me that is so important? I lied to you. You want me to return your witch sister to you, so you will say anything to me. Why should I believe what you are about to tell me? I do want you to return her to me. I want a witch for a witch. My wife, you're calling Anne a witch now. You were so determined to keep her safe yesterday. Today, you get 2 gifts from God, I said, rising onto my knees, as though bent in prayer in front of him. One gift is the death of Aragon, a clearing of an old, seemingly never-ending threat. But I give you a gift too, from God, because Aragon's death doesn't make space for Anne. That is not the divine plan. He was looking at me intently now, his air of jest gone. Anne is one of my kind. I knew it very quickly. She knew things about me that no one knows, just by looking at me. She told me who my mother was, one of the greatest secrets that I keep. Anne's baby, while born early, was not just an unformed child. Something was wrong with him, his body twisted. I cannot explain it without the supernatural. Hildy is a healer, known only to make things better. But Anne, your wife. I was crying and my nose was running, but I didn't do anything about it. I wanted to save Anne because she is one of my kind, but it is not worth it to me if Hildy must take her place, when Hildy is beneficent and Anne is maleficent. The Queen is a witch. You felt her spell when you fell for her. I felt it too. I wanted to protect her, love her, care for her. But she burns whatever is in her path. Her womb is burnt because of the magic she has used to bewitch you. She will never bear you a living son, only half-formed demons. I was speaking so steadily, with such ease. It was disgusting how easy the words came to me. She has England bewitched. I can confirm it. She needs to be discarded to make room for the new. Who is the new? He asked. I took a deep breath. I let my eyes look up as though God himself was about to give me this answer, even though Henry reeked of her perfume and his jewels adorned her pretty little neck. Seymour, I whispered. He actually gasped. Jane? No, her brother, good God. Jane, I said to him. Everything that has happened, it is to make room for Jane. It is a divine clearing of the way. It gives you great pain to tell me this. Yes. Why? Because I like your wife very much. Because she has bewitched you, he muttered. I exhaled and closed my eyes. He believed. I thought perhaps she would die. He was almost talking to himself. Maybe she still will. I wanted to leave, but I needed him to give me Hildy. Will you release Hildy? Norfolk entered. I think you've given her long enough, Your Majesty. Fetch her deaf kin. She has done no wrong. I exhaled. Thank you, Your Majesty. And I suppose you still want my trumpeter. I ask for a lot, don't I? He nodded, but he was not upset. I want him here for the funeral procession of Aragon. Then you may have him. I fell into a deep curtsy. It's Beckett, Your Majesty, I said into my skirts. What's that? Edward Beckett, Your Majesty. My husband. I owed you his name. I looked up. He looked amused. Ah, I know the man. A whiffle-waffle. You have done well to avoid him. I smiled my thanks. He gestured towards the door, excusing me. What will you do with the Queen, Your Majesty? 'Tis none of your concern, which,